Welcome, everybody, back to the CPTSD podcast. We're going to be talking about coping skills today. What's healthy, what's not healthy, where to start, how to know if they're working. So stay tuned, and we'll see you inside in just a minute.
Welcome back, everyone, to season 2, episode 7 of the CPTSD podcast. I am Elizabeth Pace, licensed professional counselor supervisor in New Orleans, Louisiana, joined as ever by my colleague and counterpart, Tabitha Bird Weaver, licensed professional counselor supervisor, licensed marriage and family therapist in the great state of Oregon. We are here to give you a little episode shorty about maybe something you know already. If you know you've got healthy coping strategies, hopefully this will be affirming. If you have that suspicion that some of the things that you're doing are not working as well, it might be because they are not helpful. So we're going to start with Tab. She's going to cue us up and kind of talk about what we're going to bring up in today's episode. So yeah, when you think about coping strategies for someone who is a complex trauma survivor, Tabitha, what are people doing? What do they do to cope?
Well, if you're at the very beginning of your journey, it might feel like you do nothing to cope and that everything is overwhelming all the time. And that's a really common experience. And so, before we dig into specifics about coping, I would just like to say, please remember while we're talking today that coping is not the same as healing. Right. And so, one thing I'd like everybody to keep in mind is that we're going to use coping skills throughout our entire life, but they change depending on our skill sets and life circumstances. And so, whatever you hear today are starting places or things to think about, not necessarily the linear answer to all your problems. So, going back to what you were saying, Beth, when we first start addressing CPTSD, or in that first third of understanding what's been going on for us, a lot of times our coping skills we learn from our family of origin, and so they're not solid. They're not really helpful coping skills. So, just to define what a healthy coping skill would be, it's something that either moves you forward in resolving the problem you have or returning you to a center balanced point where then you can address the problem that you have. And so, a lot of times, coping skills that people need at the very beginning are fundamental things that we did not learn from our family. For example, what is emotional regulation?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's the skill set of being able to understand that you do not like something or it's uncomfortable for you or even downright harmful. And you can hang on to yourself to make decisions about that and be aware of what's going on. That's a lot of work. So far, what do you think about what I'm saying, Beth?
Yeah, we talked in maybe episode 1 of season 2 about dissociation. I want to remind you guys that Tabitha and I will often say dissociation is like one of the OG coping strategies. And so when we talk about now that you are an adult, now that you have a little more autonomy in your life, you get this opportunity to actually stop and take stock. What is actually me? How do I want to show up in my adult life? What do I think being an adult means? And then starting to parse out, where is that my traumatic patterning and where is that my authentic self? So we don't shame or judge dissociation because we understand that at a certain point in time, it was a survival strategy. So I'll also add to what Tabitha is talking about. There's survival strategies. Those are the things that got you through your childhood, survival traits, ways that you figured out to wire and manage your circumstances. Those can be called coping strategies, certainly. But we've talked in the podcast before about the difference between survival and thriving.
Right.
And they're not the same thing. And when you've got an overactive nervous system, survival becomes paramount, even at the detriment of thriving in your present day.
Absolutely. And that overactive nervous system that you're talking about, which we all have. So if you have been diagnosed or think you might have CPTSD and you don't think that your nervous system is overacting, I really encourage you to relook at that
Mhm.
because it's kind of like fundamental to what's happening here.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it would be helpful for us to talk about some things that are not healthy that I have seen countless times with my clients as well as with myself. And the first place I would start is using any kind of substance or activity to excess, right? That could be drugs or alcohol, overeating, undereating, over exercising, under exercising, over sexing, not sexing at all. Whatever you're overdoing or completely avoiding is a good place to start looking about unhealthy skills. Usually, when we are overdoing in those areas, and it's usually an overdo, not an underdo, in my experience, but it can go either way, right? What we're trying to do is regulate that nervous system that
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing it. So, go ahead.
Yeah,
I
as
see
you
your.
were talking, because I'm hearing you say, like, it could be eating a lot, or it could be under eating, or it could be, so thinking about the extreme pendulum swings between control, obsessive control, and reckless abandon. One of them being, this way to kind of dissociate, disappear, because there's some that you might think, well, this isn't that big of a deal. But if it's like you look up from having been on Instagram for 3 hours and you can't really, um, or like YouTube for however long, the internet is designed to aid and abet dissociation, depending on how you're using it. So yeah, to your point, I think I just gave a talk yesterday talking about that, like, substance use or addictions really is like aiding and abetting dissociation. And I think about the over control managing is like essentially like believing your anxiety and obsession stories, which is really just keeping you in your head and not in your body. So, yes, absolutely. You can get addicted to control, you can get addicted to work, you can get addicted to substances. Um, so, yeah, I think about whatever it is in extreme.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of the places that extreme shows up is in our relationships. Right. And so another thing I hear from most of my clients is that they either have a real propensity to control an environment or a relationship, meaning everything has to go as expected. Otherwise, there's a problem, right? That is, again, us trying to regulate our nervous system. No, no surprises.
Mhm.
To people pleasing, the other end of that, where you can end up feeling like you have no self and no choice.
Mhm.
And so just watch for those extremes too, also in relationships.
Yeah.
And it's really complicated when you get into relationships because a lot of the coping strategies we've learned, either from our family or the situation we were in or in recovery, are directly related to relationships. And it seems like they can be helpful even when they're not, right? Like people pleasing seems like a great, and you're being nice, right? You're caring for other people. So there's a lot of ways that we can justify being controlling or people pleasing. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And the other place is sleep.
Mm.
If you are oversleeping or undersleeping, this is not just related to depression. Again, it is related to you trying to avoid more trauma and regulate your nervous system. So those are some of the most common ways I've seen that we all tend to go for an unhealthy coping strategy that makes sense when we're doing it, but doesn't really help our life move forward. What are your thoughts, Beth?
So one of the things I want to add when you were talking about relationships, I talk about this with my clients a lot. Watch your relationship with fantasy. It's going to be this, we've talked about this in earlier episodes, this kind of kicking the can of like, okay, I'm about to solve this problem that's right in front of me, or I'm about to attain this thing. If my memory serves me, it was kind of like Tabitha and I were talking in an earlier episode. It's like the letdown after achieving or receiving an accolade, because the fantasy says we imbue the thing that we have not yet gotten with the power to make us happy. And so this shows up often in relationships, but it can show up just about anywhere. And the reason this is an unhealthy coping strategy is because you don't get to be present in your life. You're constantly going, I'm almost like, I'll earn happiness, I'm going to earn freedom, or I'm going to feel lovable, I'm going to feel loved, as the goalposts are always moving. If you stop and really take a look at where you are, I think about it in reference to like a hamster wheel or going on a merry-go-round, up and down and around and around. And you think you are just a hair's breadth away from catching what's right in front of you, as you're always only just one vicious tiger's bite, be like running away from the thing that you're trying to escape. Notice this fantasy, folks. Real life
Mm-hmm.
is mundane, joyful, messy, hard, fun, complicated. But when you're living in a fantasy world, I had one of my clients come back to me and tell me that they had spent the entire weekend just like imagining what life would be like if they were married to this particular movie star. Dishes are
Mm.
piling up in their sink. But this is also someone who would change jobs about once every year and then have major panic attacks after about week one on the job, because they would
Mm.
realize the job change didn't fix the internal chemistry.
Yeah, and that is a lifetime of disappointment.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
painful. Really painful,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so then what are good coping mechanisms? And, like we said at the beginning, good coping mechanisms are things that either return you to yourself and your presence
Mhm.
or resolve a problem or both if you can
Right.
manage it, right? And I would just say foundationally that if I were beginning this whole process again and my healing again, I would definitely stick with learning how to be present, because resolving problems, you can resolve problems from a dissociated state and it can work out, but it's like at best 50-50 that you're going to get a result that helps you heal, move forward, or enjoy your life. And
Mhm.
so, one of the primary ways we've talked about many times on this podcast is emotional regulation and how to do that. And a core key here is self soothing. And self soothing is what we've been talking about with all these unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? So,
Right.
how do you flip that? How do you
Right.
flip it? And in my experience, most of us have to have a plan to really effectively flip that, like, or an awareness. I'm not saying you need like have a written down detailed plan, but for example, for me, when I started realizing that my diplomas and my certifications were not the thing, like you were just talking about,
Yeah.
I had to come up with a plan. When I start feeling that disappointment or that letdown, what am I going to do instead? Right? Instead. And so that's where I started to learn things like take a walk, tune into your breathing in a different way. And mind you, I'm a therapist at this point already in this time frame that I'm talking about. So wherever you're at, it is okay, just figuring out how to get back into your body is the number one coping skill where I would start. And we've talked about opportunities to do that, like 5 4 3 2 1 and other sensory type things that can support you being here now. And one of my favorites, I'm going to demonstrate it real quick, Beth. One of my favorites is from polyvagal theory. And, a lot of people are attached to that now and figuring out how to soothe that vagus nerve. And thank you, we needed that. This is so simple. It's a hug, and you gently stroke down the outsides of your arms. That's it. So for something, I mean but that is hard to do when you're riled up, right? Or
Hmm.
when you're feeling unsafe. So if all you do is start with a hug, great.
Hmm.
The key here is to get into your body. What are your thoughts there, Beth?
Grateful that you brought up that and as a demonstration. So, just one more time, like if you were going to very briefly, like talk someone who's only listening through, how do they do it? Because you say a hug and you run your arms, like what does it look like? How do you do it?
That's great because I'm watching myself in a video. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right.
So, what you would do is you could, this is one way, but I would just start here. It's simple. Cross your arms over your chest so that your wrists are crossed and you are touching the opposite shoulder with each hand. And
Mhm.
then, really gently, like super light touch, like you're stroking a cat, just run your hands down your arms to your elbows. Further if you want, but to the elbows. Lift your hands, bring them back to the top, start over. You do
Okay.
not want to go back up. You don't want to rub back up. It won't hurt or kill you if you do, but it's more effective if you don't. So, once again, hands cross over your chest, opposite hand on the shoulder, and gently stroke down to at least your elbow.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Tabitha's talking about presence, I just want to remind you guys that are listening or watching, um, shoulding yourself about not being able to do this isn't, I have never been in a circumstance where heaping shame or punishment on myself or someone else because they didn't know how to do something helped us get masterful or skillful at it. Um, it's just the wrong type of energy. So when I'm working with people, and sometimes depending on either how much or how often the habit has become dissociating or escaping how you feel, what you've got is a low tolerance for your own emotional distress. You zap away as soon as you start to feel it. One of the things I'll ask my clients to do is whenever you feel an uncomfortable sensation in your body, I ask them to breathe in around it. We're not trying to reject it. We're not trying to make it go away. We're actually just trying to prove through the breath that this is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. And there's a difference between those two, but that your nervous system may not have yet formed that connection. You're going to be the one who's potentiating those neural pathways when, when Tab says get into your body and you go, who needs that?
Right.
I've got a big, beautiful brain and my body is just the vehicle for that brain. Find that like sense of rejection and disgust in your body, breathe around it, ventilate it, just to show your nervous system that this is a feeling. Not all feelings are comfortable, but they're not dangerous. Not dangerous like Tab and I running away from a mastodon, you know, millions or hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's not the same. We're sitting down, but it's what for me, what I want to keep reflecting back to. The fear of what is uncovered or undiscovered creates suspense. And the
Mm.
suspense of the unknown is what makes it so hard to be present. So we talked about presence, and we've given now two examples of that. What's another one of your healthy coping strategies for someone who's early in their journey?
So, this is a little mental work, so y'all might like that for a minute. If you are headers like Beth and I have been intellectualizers, there is a point where we have to learn acceptance. And and dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a specific form of therapy geared toward teaching coping skills, right? So if you want to look that up, and there are tons of handouts and other things that you can use, including about acceptance. They call it radical acceptance. Beth, while you were just talking about us trying to avoid our emotions, I just want to pop in here for a second before I get to acceptance and say, of course you were. Because when you were in your situation, whatever that is, it felt like impending death. And that's the suspense part, right? And so,
Mhm.
this key skill of acceptance is really hard, especially if you tend to live in fantasy or do those pendulum swings that we've been talking about. But it's key. It's really key. Acceptance means you understand the situation for what it really is and you accept that it's true. It does not mean that you approve of it, that you condone it, that you're enjoying the situation, just that it's actually happening. And that's the thing you have to deal with. So, for example, when I was coming through my process, I had to accept some big ideas like my family couldn't give me what I needed. That was hard because up until that point, I was still trying to get them to do it. And
Mm.
it felt like my value was based on them doing it. And so acceptance can start with much smaller ideas. For example, if something doesn't go as expected, you could pause and recognize that didn't go like I planned and I don't like it. I don't like the feelings I'm having. I don't like what's going on here. And just learning to come into that, like you were talking about, that space around what actually is happening will be very beneficial. So, Beth, I'm noticing that we're about 10 minutes away from our ending point today, and I just wanted to pop that in there and see if there are any really important ideas that you want to make sure we provide.
Yeah. When I think about healthy coping, I also think about an internal locus of control. So, adult children of family dysfunction often says that one of the promises of recovery is we'll learn how to play and have fun in our lives. And so, healthy coping strategies, I would say, like, must needs includes the doing things you like to do. People pleasing and feeling kind of warm and fuzzy by avoiding conflict and getting somebody else what they want is not what I'm talking about. If you're a movie buff and you like going to the movies, you like superhero movies, cool. If you used to like roller skating, I don't know, like I'm thinking about what did you used to enjoy, like when you had a clear path to your own kind of joyful childlike self. um and I just don't think life is meant to be about solving other people's problems or avoiding pain. Like I think that life has got to have something more to it. And and so maybe like just going to a dog park if you like dogs, but right now you can't have a dog. And just like people are like, are you just, and you're like, here to see the dogs? Sure. Doing something that sparks joy in you, if that's painting or reading, um, maybe even rereading a book that you liked as a child, just finding a way to tap back into things that create joy for you in your life, I think is massively important because we can also get so used to avoiding threat that we're not using these other neural pathways that we have in existence in our brain, but we're not practicing and we're not potentiating them, which, again, to use that reference means that your threat and problem solving is that 4-lane superhighway that you get into a super fast car and always drive down, but it only goes one way. And we want you to be tapping in um, joy to strengthen your capacity. So then life isn't only miserable. Life isn't only joyless and about avoiding pain. It's actually about, and also that like achievement, it's fun to get something, like it's fun to get an accolade, but lasting joy or creating a life with joy is not about like a one-time piece of paper. And that's what we're talking about related to the fantasy. So if it's raining outside and you put on a pair of boots and you jump in some puddles, that's something you can do literally in this moment. It's raining in New Orleans right now, which is why that just crossed my mind. Versus going, as soon as I get this problem with my relationship solved, I'll finally be able to be happy. It's like kicking the can about quality of life, which also means you're just never going to get into the practice of enjoying your life today.
Right. And what's that quote? We're here for a good time, not a long time.
Amen. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm really resonating with what you were saying. One of the healthiest things I did for myself in my time of crisis was sign up for a ceramics class.
Awesome.
Right. And as you're talking right now, I'm like, I used to collect leaves, fall leaves on walks and press them in books. I'm doing that again. So
Yeah,
things
yeah.
don't have to be hard or cost money.
That's
So
right.
don't use that as an excuse. It could be jumping in mud puddles.
Exactly. And like really
Beth, I
getting the
appreciate that
flash.
so much.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's also not like pass fail as much as I want you to think about the skills of curiosity,
Yes.
interest. That if you ask yourself a question like, what would I like to do today? And then, that part of you goes, well, it's not like I'm going to ever be able to be independent because I'm stuck living in my parents' house forever. So I guess I'm not like, that's a part of you that feeds off your misery. And if you let that part run your life, I'm not going to say that's an unhealthy coping strategy, even though one way would be to look at it like this is the part that says, don't get your hopes up, then your hopes aren't going to get crushed. But this is also this like wet blanket in life. And so if you ask yourself a question like, what would I like to do today? And you don't have an answer, if you have access to this podcast, either on YouTube or on your smart device where you're listening, then you have web access, fun things to do at home with your 10-year-old. All right. And then do one of them with you
Yep.
and your inner child.
Perfect advice. And that is a wonderful way to think about it. I love how it is okay to not shame that part that's the wet blanket because they're trying to keep you safe
Mm-hmm.
and tap into the part that wants to be creative and expressive and true self. It's a great place to end this conversation. No
Mm-hmm.
matter what coping skills you start to facilitate right now, congratulations. And please remember that this is a learning process. So some days it's going to be easy for you to do your new coping skills, and some days you won't be able to do it. And that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
So, Beth, any last words for you?
Apropos of our conversation, um, I would say that there isn't a healthy coping rule book because it's individual to you. Some people like moving their bodies and physical exercise. Some people like to sit in stillness. I would recommend, though, that like whatever the presence practice is, you have a wisdom in you that goes deeper than your wounding. And
Mm,
Tabitha believes that. I believe that. And that learning to sit still, the research shows, I think I've said this on our podcast before, the research shows that meditating for 20 minutes a day, twice a day, shrinks your amygdala. It actually makes the stress rattle in your brain smaller. Because here's what happens. You sit still and your brain goes, this is a problem. And then like the fact that you're just staying still and breathing and you go, well, it's not dangerous. Huh. And then it happens all over again. And then that part that says, like, if you don't send this email right now, figuratively, literally, heads will roll. And then you go, no, that's not true. That email can wait for the 16 more minutes that I'm sitting still. What you're doing is just proving that these like activating, threatening thoughts that are crossing your mind are just your thoughts and um not something that you have to like create a stressful reality around and then go, well, I'm just reacting to things the way that they are. Sitting still is probably one of the scariest and the hardest things that we learn how to do when we're in trauma recovery. um
mm-hmm,
it's one of the best things you can do for yourself
mm-hmm.
at whatever level and capacity you have at this time.
That's right. And so, if you're somebody who's been judging yourself about your meditation skills because you can't empty your mind, fantastic. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Figuring out what's going on in there and learning that it's okay to have thoughts and have your body stay calm. I love the way you talked about all of that, Beth.
Yeah. Well, and listen, to be clear, I do not meditate for 40 minutes a day. So like I read
Right.
the research, I know about it. I don't do it. Um, and there are things that I do in my life that make me feel grounded and myself. And there are things that I do less of today because it makes me feel healthier and more authentically myself. And I don't sort of like self-flagellate over the fact that I'm not doing coping perfectly every day because that's the pits, y'all.
That is the pits, and it'll keep us stuck right there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? It'll keep us stuck right there. So, however you're starting, or however you're even thinking about starting, you're already on the road.
Yep,
Congratulations.
that's right. The wheels
Hmm.
of change are already in motion.
They are rolling. So even just by listening to podcasts like this
Totally.
or other information, you are improving. That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that this has been helpful for you and kind of set a tone for you all as you are beginning to think about how to do things differently. And the last little tidbit I'll pop in there before, Beth, we turn over to you and some exciting news that you have is I learned early in my career as a therapist about something called abstinence versus harm reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important because for those of us with CPTSD, it's super easy for us to slip into thinking errors like black or white thinking. And so abstinence means you never do that again, even once. You abstain from it, or you start doing it and never stop if you want to flip it a little bit. Harm reduction is how about we do a little bit better and reduce the harm? I would really encourage you all to approach this with harm reduction
Yeah,
because it allows for curiosity and learning.
totally. Yeah, I think that's so gracious because then it isn't that all or nothing, pass or fail. So there's no throwing the whole attempt out just because it's like, well, I messed up. The way that I've heard that said before is like, if you ran, if you accidentally ran one stop sign, you wouldn't go, well, look, I already ran a stop sign today, so I might as well just run the rest of them for the rest of the day. You go, oh gosh, whew, that was a little dangerous. I will be
Yeah,
more mindful and try to stop at all traffic stops for the remainder of the day. That's it. That's it. Um,
that's simple.
yeah, great talk. That healthy coping and cut yourself a break.
Yes. Beth, you wanted to share some news with our
That's
listeners
right.
today.
I saw the funniest meme, maybe yesterday, maybe today, that was like, I'm participating in November, pronounced November, in which I will be saying no to everything. Don't ask me for anything. I thought that was so funny. Um, one of the things that we talk all the time in this podcast about is like self care. And what I am going to be doing is less. So that will include taking a step away from doing the podcast with Tab. The podcast is still going to be here, which means that Tabitha is going to be taking the reins, and you guys are in great hands. And if the time comes that I am working on other projects, I will come back as a guest and tell you all about where to find me. But for the time being, my goal for 2022 and 2023 is to do less, because that's going to be part of like my own, self-care. So it's been a treat and a joy to be here and to do this. For anyone that this has helped remotely, I'm so happy. I'm so touched and blessed to have had this opportunity and that you guys are out here listening. This isn't going to be the last podcast. We're still going to do the season finale. And possibly by then I'll have a way that you can find me on social media. But as you've heard me on previous episodes, you can't find me on social media because I'm just hanging out with my dogs. So yeah,
That sounds good.
yeah, right. It's been such a treat. So yeah, thanks for giving me a space to share that. And um, in closing, for you guys, what I say to my clients all the time is I believe you have everything within you that you need. You have everything already in you to heal because you have a brain and a body, and they're working. They work well enough. And that's all you actually need. You have everything that you need to heal. And we as animals, as human beings, are wired towards protecting ourselves. And then when the need to protect ourselves has been removed from us, we're wired towards health and healing.
We are. That was so beautifully said.
Mm.
Beth, thank you for doing less and modeling that for us because I'm serious. I'm serious. That is an important thing to recognize. And I'm so grateful that you're honest about that and modeling how to be embracing what you need and what's good for you right now. And thank you again for co-founding this labor of love.
It has
It
been
has
such a
been
joy.
so rewarding. So to bring us to a close, our next episode is going to be about so you're going home for the holidays.
Wait, so you're choosing to go home for the holidays.
That's
Let us
right.
be clear.
That is clear. So we're going to talk with you about that. And don't know if there are going to be any tips and tricks, but we're going to really help you sort through your choice.
That's
So
that's
that being
right.
said, that's right. That being said, you can always reach out to us at the CPTSD podcast. I'm all over social media, whether I want to be there or not. Nope, just kidding. I enjoy it. Feel free to connect, and we'll see you next time.
Bye guys. Take care.